Welcome to the University of Houston and the Catherine G. McGovern College of the Arts. I'm Melissa Noble, the Managing Director of the Cynthia Woods Mitchell Center here at the university. We are delighted to be presenting Robert Wilson here tonight, and that is all possible because of the generous gift of George and Cynthia Mitchell, which provided for the creation of the Cynthia Woods Mitchell Center for the Arts. The Mitchell Center commissions new works and provides a variety of annual programs, including performances, lectures, exhibitions, hosting visiting artists from around the world, supporting artistic research, scholarships, and fellowships. The focus of these programs is to bridge disciplines, promote collaboration across the visual, performing, and literary arts. I'd like to thank my co-director and the artistic director of the Mitchell Center, Stephen Mattisio, for his constant collaboration. The staff of the Mitchell Center, especially Sarah Jentz, for her administrative support. And finally, I would like to acknowledge the people behind the scenes who have worked to light us on stage and get all of this technology working. Thank you to Brian Norton and Rachel Bush and Callie from the Theater of Dance, School of Theater and Dance. And now I present the Dean of our college, Dr. Andrew Davis.
Good evening. I'm Andrew Davis. I'm Dean of the McGovern College of the Arts. Great to have you all here. I see many people I haven't seen in a long time, so thanks for coming out to see Robert Wilson. It is my honor that I get to introduce Robert Wilson. I don't know how I got such an honor. Actually, I guess I do, but I'm still very, very happy about the honor to introduce Robert Wilson. It is great. You must imagine how great it is to have Robert Wilson at the University of Houston. So Robert Wilson is a native of Waco, Texas. He was educated at the University of Texas at Austin, the Pratt Institute in New York, and he is now and has been for the last 50 years known the world over as one of the preeminent creators and directors of work for the theater. His design and direction for the stage integrates dance, lighting, sculpture, props, text and language, and dance and movement, and just as importantly, explores meaningful oppositions in the juxtaposition of elements such as movement and stillness and speech and silence. The number of seminal pieces of work for the stage by Robert Wilson are far too numerous to name. I will try naming a few of them so you get a context and a sense of the scope of the work that we're talking about. His work for the theater includes stagings of Virginia Woolf's Orlando in Berlin, Henrik Ibsen's When We Dead Awaken in Boston and Houston, Ibsen's Peer Gynt in Oslo, Gertrude Stein's Dr. Faustus Lights the Lights and Saints and Singing, both for Berlin, Georg Bruckner's Wojciech in Copenhagen, Samuel Beckett's Crop's Last Tape for Spoleto, Homer's Odyssey in Athens, Goethe's Faust in Berlin, and many, many others. Wilson's work in opera, just as important to his career and just as important to the history of the theater in America, includes stagings of Salome for Milan, Parsifal for Hamburg, The Magic Flute for Paris, Bluebeard's Castle, Erwartung and Pelléas and Melisande for the Salzburg Festival, Four Saints in 3 Acts and Turandot for the Houston Grand Opera, Wagner's Ring Cycle for Zurich, and a trilogy of operas of Monteverdi for Milan and Paris, including Orfeo, The Return of Ulysses to His Homeland, and The Coronation of Poppaea. Robert Wilson has collaborated widely and with many peers. In particular, he has long been associated with musicians and writers Tom Waits and Lou Reed, the composer Philip Glass, and the singer Jesse Norman. Wilson's work has been shown in numerous exhibitions around the world, including at the Pompidou Center in Paris, the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, the Contemporary Arts Museum Houston, Mass MoCA, Crystal Bridges, the Guggenheim Museum, both New York and Bilbao, and again, many, many, many others, too numerous to name. Robert Wilson is the recipient of, among many other awards, 2 Rockefeller Fellowships, 2 Guggenheim Fellowships, a Pulitzer Prize nomination, the Golden Lion at the Venice Biennale, and the Europe Theater Prize. He is a commander of the Order of Arts and Letters and an officer of the Legion of Honor, so named by the state of France. And Germany has awarded him the Cross of the Order of Merit. He has 8 honorary doctorates, and the New York Times has called him a towering figure in the world of experimental theater and an explorer in the uses of time and space on stage. I will add to the list of honors that Robert Wilson is an artist in residence at the Cynthia Woods Mitchell Center for the Arts in the McGovern College of the Arts at the University of Houston, and I will ask you to help me give Robert Wilson a very warm welcome back to Texas and to the University of Houston.
Good evening. Good evening. I would like to talk to you this evening about the roots of my work and how I got started doing what I'm doing. The reason I work as an artist is to say, what is it? And not to say what something is. And for if we know what it is we're doing, there's no reason to do it. The reason to work is to say, what is it? How all occasions do inform against me and spur my dull revenge. Examples gross as earth exhort me. Witnesses army of such mass and charge, led by a delicate and tender prince, the nephew to old Norway Fortinbras, whose divine ambition puffed makes mouths at the invisible event. What am I saying? That's Hamlet. Actually, I learned that text when I was 12. Many years later, I learned the entire text of Hamlet and performed it here at the Alley Theater. And I'm 81 and I'm still saying it. And each time I say it, I can think about it in a completely different way. That's not to say it doesn't have meaning, but it's full of meanings. The work I do is non-interpretive. It's to ask questions. I can read Hamlet one night and think about it one way, and the next night read it, the same text again, and thinking about it in a completely different way. Shakespeare couldn't completely understand what he wrote. It was not meant to be completely understood. It was something to contemplate, to think about. As it was said in the introduction, I grew up in Waco, and I didn't really have a chance to go to art museums because there weren't art museums. And I hadn't seen much theater and I hadn't seen opera at all. And it was not until I went to New York in my early 20s to study architecture that I seriously started looking at theater and opera. I saw Broadway plays and I didn't like them, and I still don't for the most part. And I went to the opera and I didn't like that either. It was grotesque. And then I saw the work of George Balanchine and the New York City Ballet, and I liked that very much, and I still like it. I like it because it gave me time to think. I like the way the dancers behaved on stage, how they danced for themselves, allowing the audience to come to them without insisting too much on the audience attention. And in particular, I was fascinated by the abstract ballets of Balanchine. Wow, that was so different from what I saw in Broadway and what I saw in the opera. And then I saw the work of Merce Cunningham and John Cage, and I liked that also, and I still like it. It was curious that often the music was put with the dance only on the first night. So it was by chance that I found relationships between what I was hearing and what I was seeing. And once again, that was so different from the Broadway theater and the opera. And I think looking back tonight on my work, the first major influence on my work was looking at the dance. In 1967, I was walking down a street in Summit, New Jersey, and I saw a policeman about to hit a black boy over the head with a club. And I grabbed the arm of the policeman and said, "Why do you hit this boy?" And the policeman said, "It's none of your business." I said, "But it is. I'm a responsible citizen. Why do you hit this boy?" And eventually, the tension dissolved, and I walked with the boy and the policeman to a police station and heard the sounds coming from him and recognized them as that of a deaf person. And after some hours at the police station, the boy was released. He had thrown a stone through a church window. And I went to a 2-room apartment where he was living with 13 people, an all-black family. In the following days, weeks, and months, I began to learn more about the boy and his situation. He had grown up in Alabama and Louisiana in rural communities, and the people with whom he lived didn't understand that his problem was one of not hearing. And he'd been sent from family to family. We didn't know who his parents were. And when I met him recently, he had been sent to New Jersey. He was a menace in the community. He was stealing and they had thought that he was uneducable, that he couldn't learn. And he was going to be institutionalized. And I said, first of all, how do we know that he cannot learn? I said, we tested him. I said, can I see the examination? And after much ado, I was shown the examination, and it was a written examination. I said, I'm not sure the boy knows any words. And I'm not sure then this examination is really valid. But we'll test him again. And they gave him 50 sheets of blank paper and a pencil, and he put a little diagonal line on the corner of each page. And the state psychologist in New Jersey, the result of, she said, was that she didn't believe that he could learn. I said, I can't believe this little diagonal line is a sign that he's uneducable. And because he had no legal guardian, as a gay man in 1967 in November, I went to court to see if I could adopt him and he would have a legal guardian, and we could prevent him, I could prevent him from being institutionalized. So I went to court. I had a 27-year-old lawyer. And the judge said, Mr. Wilson, what makes you think this child's intelligent? I said, Your Honor, Judge, he has a sense of humor. Well, that didn't work with the judge. And towards the end of the proceedings, I said to this 27-year-old lawyer I said, do you think there's any chance that they will give me the boy? He said, no. I said, what can we say to convince the judge to give me the boy? He said, I have no idea. So towards the end of the proceedings, I said, you know, Judge, if you don't give me this boy, it will cost the state of New Jersey a hell of a lot of money to lock him up. So, Mr. Wilson, you've got a good point. So they gave me the boy. I was curious to how he thought, because I thought in words. I thought he was intelligent, perhaps highly intelligent. And it was apparent that he thought in terms of visual signs and signals. Often he would see things that I didn't see because I was preoccupied in what I was hearing. And I began to see things differently through his eyes. And we communicated with one another through drawings and diagrams. He would show me a drawing that he had of a dream or some fantasy. And towards the end of the 60s, I decided to write a play with him. My first major work in the theater was written with Raymond Andrews, a deaf-mute child that knew no words or very few words. And I worked on it for nearly 2 years. And I presented it finally in New York. I had rented the Brooklyn Academy of Music in the Opera House and showed it. And it was not very well received. It was 7 hours long and silent. Most people left. We did 4 performances only, and there were just a handful of people in the audience at the end. And after the 4th performance, a man came backstage and said, I would like to show this in France at the Festival of Nancy. And so I went to France with 48 people and worked with another 30 people in France, and we presented this 7-hour play that was in silence. 2 performances. And much to my surprise, we had a tremendous reception at the end. And after the first performance, there was almost a half hour of standing applause. And Pierre Cardin was there and said, I'd like to take it to Paris and show it in Paris for 10 times. And we did go to Paris, and we ended up performing 2.5 months to 2,200 people every night for a 7-hour play in silence. Louis Aragon wrote a letter to André Breton and said, I've seen the most beautiful thing in my life. This is what we had hoped the future could be. And as a result of these performances in Paris, I had invitations to go to the Piccolo Teatro in Milano, La Scala, the Berlin Opera, and houses throughout Europe. And I wasn't real sure I wanted a career in the theater. I was really more interested in painting and being a painter, but I wasn't a very good one. And I began to realize that what I did on stage was maybe more interesting as a painter of the stage. When I first was in New York and I went to the theater, and as I said, I didn't really like it. I think one of the things that disturbed me is that what I was seeing was always a decoration or illustration of what I was hearing. And I think simply to say there wasn't time to think. There was a Lebanese author that came to see The Deaf Man Glance in Paris, and she saw it twice, Tel Adnan. And she came backstage and introduced herself to me and said, I like your work because it gives me time to think and to dream. Some of the curious things that happened when Raymond was living with me is that one night I had a loft that was as wide as this stage and again half as long. And Raymond had his back to me. He was at one end and I was at the other end. And I called out to him, "Raymond!" And he didn't hear me. I knew if I would stamp my foot on the floor, he'd feel the vibration and turn around. And then I did a very curious thing. "Hey, man! Hey, man!" In the sound of a deaf person, and he turned around. "Hey, man! How are you? Hey, man, how are you?" In the sound of a deaf person. And he started laughing. Like, "Hey, man, you're talking my language." And I started thinking about it, that as far as we could measure his hearing in the eardrum up to 110 decibels, he heard nothing. But his body was more familiar with the vibrations of a deaf person. And in a sense, his body was hearing, was feeling sound. In the Deaf Man Glance, he had a scene in which he did these rocking movements. And I asked him one night, I said, "Can you put a sound with the movements?" So he did these rocking movements. They repeated and repeated, and they'd been, I couldn't believe it. It was not the sound of a deaf person. "Hey, man, how are you?" Where the sound is blocked within in the body. Here the sound, the scream, was free. You would never distinguish the sound as the scream as that of a deaf person. And I started thinking about it. We started with the movement first, and from movement, the sound came. Some anthropologists believe that man was moving before speaking, and through movement, sound came, raised to a higher vibration, later connected to mental thought, and words were formed. But it started with movement. So I think the second most important influence on my work, looking back this evening with you, was the meeting of Raymond Andrews, a deaf-mute boy who knew no or few words. In the 60s, I had a loft in Lower Manhattan, had actually 3 floors. And on every Thursday night, I would have an open house, invite people from the community or a visiting scholar in New York. And we would have maybe 75 or 100 or more people. One floor was where people danced, another floor where people ate, and a third floor where we would have talks or discussions, films. And one night, a former teacher of mine came and gave me an audio tape. And the next morning I played it, and it went something like this. M, 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 I didn't know it. M, 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 I didn't know it. M, 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 I didn't know it. M, 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 I never know it. And Emily likes the TV. Because A, because she likes Mickey Mouse. Because B, because she likes Bugs Bunny. Because A, because she likes the Flintstones. Because B, Emily likes the TV because she watches it. So I called the teacher, and my former teacher, I said, who made this tape? Said it's a man who's in an institution for brain-damaged children. And so I said, I'd like to meet him. And eventually I did meet him. And he was speaking a strange language, and and these patterns that he was speaking were being corrected. So eventually I saw other text that he was writing and recorded it and tried to transcribe it. And it was something like this. So, hat, hap, hath, at, hap, hath, hat, ap, hath, hat, hap, ath, hat, hap, hath. So this would repeat 4 times. And then a variation of that would repeat 3 times. And then this would come back for 4 times. It'd be 4 3 4 3 2 1 2 1 4 3 4 3 2 1 2 1 4 3. What sounded very arbitrary was not arbitrary at all, and he could speak it very rapidly. It was amazing that his mind was thinking geometrically, and this was being corrected. I spent some time at the O.D. Heck School where he was living. And after the first day, I went to the head of the school. I said, why are we correcting this behavior? I know it's strange, but if it were up to me, I would encourage him to do more. And eventually, he came to work with me at the loft I had at 147 Spring Street in Lower Manhattan, and with a group of people that I was working with in performances that we were creating, writing ourselves. And most of the people were non-professionals. And all of my early work had been silent, or was silent. And I decided, what if I wrote a play with Christopher Knowles and his texts? And the first night he was staying with me at my loft, he said, I'm the red secondary planned up past jet madness in the sky I remember all my life. I said, what? I'm the red secondary planned up past jet madness in the sky I remember all my life. And he made a drawing when he was 8 months old on the beach with his mother. And 2 weeks later, he said, Dear Madam, most gracious of ladies, I'll be in no way possessed from an honor of an introduction, and indeed infinitely removed from the deserving of it. Yea, sing you're unfit for the exposure of the brilliance of your sun, being in verity of a condition so abject in its destitution of grace, outward or inward, as to make my presence tolerable only to the humblest, abounding in the bounty of tolerance. I said, what? What is that? This 19th century language. He said, it's a letter for Queen Victoria. I said, where did you get this letter? No, I don't know. Chris had never read a book. So my first work in the theater was called A Letter for Queen Victoria. And I wrote it with Christopher. And we showed it in New York, and it was a disaster. The New York press said, Robert Wilson takes advantage of a brain-damaged child and puts him on stage. You're damn right I did. But again, we went to Paris, and we had a phenomenal success. Nathalie Sarraute, Alain Robbe-Grillet, the structuralist writers in France were interested, very interested in Christopher and his mind and how it was structuring thoughts. I'd like to show you some images of, this is my very early work, so next. This is in 1967. I was asked by a farming community northeast of Cincinnati, Loveland, Ohio, to make a sculpture. And I started making performances in a barn that had been converted to a chapel. That's myself in the center with a hat and this long hair. And the people who performed were local people and farmers. The work was silent and images. And Raymond was with me at that time. And also a man who was head of the Department of Psychology at Columbia University, Dan Stern. Dan was doing experiments, films, studies in pre-verbal communication between mothers and babies. He had made in 67 and 68 over 250 films in natural situations where a baby would cry and the mother would reach for the baby, pick up the baby, and comfort the baby. And he took the film and he slowed it down so that in 1 second of time, he could see 24 frames. In 8 out of 10 cases, the initial reaction of the mother and the first frame, first 2 frames, no more than the first 3 frames, is that the mother is lunging at the child. The child is, next 2 or 3 frames, the mother something else, and the child is something else. Next 2 or 3 frames, the mother something else again. So that in 1 second of time, it's very complex what's happening between the mother and the child. The mother is shocked and terrified when she sees the film. She says, "But I love my child." So perhaps the body is moving faster than we think, but there is a language there. Suzanne Langer talked about in the late 60s about the impingements on the body as a language. It was these almost imperceptible movements that Raymond, the deaf boy, was more readily reading. Next. So I made a play with Raymond. This is Raymond who was leaning into a wire. And these were based on drawings that Raymond made, and I never knew where the images came from. And I had built a model of some of his drawings. And one evening, we had been to dinner, and we came back, and there was a cat that lived with us, and the cat was walking through the model. So we ended up having these big cat legs in the production. Next. This was a Russian immigrant and spoke almost no English. It was all the people that performed in the work were factory workers, people from the street, a homeless man, someone who had a townhouse on Park Avenue. It was a whole mixed bag of people from all over New York and surrounding communities. Next. Then I made a work that was called The Life and Times of Sigmund Freud. And this was the first act. So it was in 3 acts. And the first act was a beach, sunny landscape. There was a turtle that crossed the stage in 33 minutes. There was a runner that was continually running and back upstage. And there were various activities happening on this beach. And this woman in a black Victorian dress who sat immobile. I was thinking it's a little bit, like looking out at you, that I see someone who's a little sleepy, someone who's a little more awake, and that the mental energies here in the room are like this battery of different speeds and mental activities. And so I structured the stage with layers of transparent zones of different speeds of activity. And I had, in the first act, a little chair that was lowered 1/3 of the way down the proscenium. Second act was in a Victorian drawing room, and it was gray. And there was a cut in the drawing room, and outside we could see still the sunny landscape from the first act. And here near the audience, it was a little table. And at the end of the first act, the woman in the black Victorian dress put an Egyptian figure on the table. And the table was there in the second act with the Egyptian figure, and there was a high-back chair here, and at the end of the first act, there was a beast that appeared and put a Chinese antique figure on the table. And the chair was lowered 2/3 the way down the proscenium. And in the third act, next, was in a cave and was dark. And the little table was still there. The chair reached the floor and was beside the table with the Egyptian figure, the Chinese figure of antiquity. And from the beginning of my plays, I often had a chair. And then I made sculptures from the chairs. So this was a hanging chair of Freud. It was a chair made of wire mesh and lit in a certain way, seen from a certain distance. You couldn't distinguish between the chair and the shadow. It was all a drawing in space. Next. And I was in Grand Central Station. And I saw this man here that's center stage who looked something like Sigmund Freud, and I went up to him and asked him if he'd like to be in my play. And he was a retired house painter. And he said, "What would I do?" I said, "Oh, you'd play Sigmund Freud." And he said, "Well, why not?" So Freud crossed the beach in the first act with Anna Freud. He appeared in the Victorian drawing room with Anna and then left. Next. This was the Victorian drawing room with the slit through the room with the view of the beach outside. Next. And this was a cave, the third act. It was all dark. Next. And eventually the chair arrived at the table with the figures of antiquity, the Egyptian figure, the Chinese figure, and a boy who had appeared in the first two acts, entered the cave and lay down beside the table and cried 13 times. So most people said, well, it had nothing to do with Sigmund Freud, and in some ways they're right. But I was always thinking about Freud, and the life and times of Sigmund Freud. When Freud was 68, his grandson, Heinrich, whom he admired and loved very much, and Freud thought perhaps the boy would continue, as he got older, his studies. And when he was 4 years old, he died. And Freud said at the age of 68 that he suffered a depression that he had never known before with the death of Heinrich. And towards the end of his life, he said to Anna Freud in London, "I never overcame that depression. With the death of Heinrich, something within me passed away forever." So we can say that A equals B. And we can say A is a line that's that long. And we can say B is a line that's this long. And in time, in weight, they can be equal. And I was thinking of this moment with the death of the boy of Freud, with the figures of antiquity like he had in his study in Vienna, that this moment in his life, when he was 68, the year in which he developed cancer, could perhaps this short moment in time could balance a longer period of time. Now, this is not a work that you will find in history books of pictures. It's a visual book by an artist, and it was silent. Next. This is Cheryl Sutton, who performed in my early works. This is her in the first act, holding in her left hand the Egyptian figure and a raven, the beauty of this woman with the eyes and back of her. I was saying yesterday to some of the students in music and opera that when you're on stage, you're aware of the public in front of you, concentrated on this space, it's one thing. But if you're aware of the space in back of you, there is your power. It's like a bow, right? You can pull this bow and stretch it more. Can be more tension in back of you, more tension in front, but there's always this space in back of you. I was fortunate to go to Japan in the 60s, and I saw a famous kabuki actor, Tommy Sabro. And I saw him in a performance in a Shimpa play, which is the beginning of the 19th century when the Japanese theater was beginning to westernize. And he crossed the stage near the audience and turned and he walked to the back for about 12 minutes. And it was mesmerizing, so powerful. And I said to him, I said, "How do you do it? What are you thinking about?" And he said, "I'm not going to tell you." I said, "Come on, what are your tricks? How do you do that?" He said, "I changed my eyes. That my eyes at one moment are focused 50 centimeters in front of me in downtown Tokyo in back of me. And then they turn, so the focus of my eyes in front of me go to downtown Tokyo and are 50 centimeters in back of me. Then my eyes in front of me go to New York and in back of me, downtown Tokyo. Then the eyes in back of my head go to Mars. He was changing the focus of his eyes and the direction, which made this very strange appearance. Here, the nobility of Cheryl, with these aware of the space in back of her. Next. This was in the Deaf Man Glance. And was a prologue to the fourth act. And she stood at this table and she poured a glass of milk. And she walked to this boy who was sitting on a stool and offered the glass of milk to him, and he drank it. And she walked back to the table and put the glass of milk on the table. Then she took a butcher knife and a cloth, and she wiped the blade of the knife once and put the cloth down and took the knife to the boy and to his stomach, and he fell to the floor. Then she walked to the audience, and there was a child sleeping near the edge of the stage, and she offered a glass of milk to that child. And then the child drank it. She took a glass of milk, put it on the table, and took the butcher knife, now wiped the blood twice, looked into it like a mirror, turned quickly. There was only one quick movement to the child near the audience, and took the knife to the child as the child fell to the floor. I never knew who she was, whether she was in this Victorian dress, an angel of death. Dan Stern's films. The mother was reaching for the baby, and the mother says, "But I love my child." It was years later, I did Marc Anthony Charpentier's Medea. I did Euripides' Medea. I did my own Medea. But I always thought of Cheryl and the way she did this murder of the children. To do Medea is very complicated. Whatever you do on stage, you must always have light. So I can take this marker and put it against my black jacket, and it's one thing. I can put it against my white shirt, and the black is blacker because the shirt is white. I can take the white shirt and put the white paper next to it, but it's whiter as soon as it's against the black. We must always have light in whatever we're doing. So if you have to perform this Medea, this murder, there has to be light. What if there's a child watching here? Always, it helps if you think there's a child in the room. I'm going to tell you a story tonight, and it's a very dark story. Have a sound dream. Keep light. Next. So this was the Deaf Man Glance. This is a drawing that Raymond made. He had a frog sitting at the head of a table drinking martinis. And all of these were non-professional people from the street. He drew a man sitting at the table who had one large eye in the center of his forehead. Next. This is Raymond in the Deaf Man Glance. He was fishing in a forest in the sky. In the back was a pyramid. I never had an idea of where these images came from, but they were very clear in his mind. Next. And that was a sculpture I made of the flying bench with safety belts. Next. Now, Raymond had an idea that in the fourth act, there were 4 acts in the Deaf Man Glance, that we would have 68 nude, pregnant women, but we could only find one. Next. Okay. So this is when I was doing the Deafman Glance in Paris, I was asked to go to Iran and to present a work. And there were no conventional theaters in Iran. And I found this site of 7 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of 7 foothills that got progressively higher going to Persepolis. And I decided to do something on these 7 foothills. This is Shiraz in the distance. And I made a play that was 7 days long. And it would only happen once. How do you write a play that's 7 days? This is how I did it. I said, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. 24 hours. Okay. So let's take this group of people here. Let's say from 8 in the morning to 9 o'clock. You can do anything you want for the first day. And there's the theme of a flood. So you guys can decide what you want to do, but you have an hour to make a play or an event based on a flood. Let's take this group of people from 9 to 10, and you can do something based on a flood, and we'll present that from 9 to 10. This group of people we have from 10 to 11, and you do something on a flood, until finally we have everyone in this room working on a performance that's based on a flood. And then we come back to day 2. And we take this group again from 8 to 9, and you can continue the work you were doing, but there's a different theme. And this group comes back again, this group, until once again we fill in this mega structure with events. I had one event each day from 9 in the evening to 10, which I staged something based on the theme of that day. And day 1, the events took place on the first hill. And day 2, on 1 and 2. And day 3, 1 and 3, 1 through 3, until by the 7th day, there were activities happening on all 7 hills. Next. This was one of the events on one of the days. Next. This was in the foothills outside of Shiraz. Next. The event that I made was about a family, and the family was saying goodbye to an old man in the first day, and the old man was going on a journey. And then the next day was another generation, and the next day another generation, and the next generation. And the 7th day, the old man returned to the family. And one of the paths on the 7 hills was following the journey of this old man. Next. And on this 7th day, I had at the top of the mountain a dinosaur that was built. And we had painted it all whitewashed. I was given the Persian army with 5,000 people. And so I staged the Trojan War and various things. But one of the things we did was to whitewash the seventh hill. And then we took these 5,000 soldiers on surrounding hills, and the final hour of the 7-day play, they were chanting, the Dinah, the Dinah, the Dinah, the Dinah, the Dinah, the Dinah, the dinosaur, soaring. And we blew up the top of the mountain with dynamite. It actually came from a drawing that Raymond had given me. I'll show you the drawing later. Next. Oh, no, go back. So now I'm making the life and times of Joseph Stalin, which was a 12-hour silent opera. The best class I ever had in school, 22 years of formal education, was taught by Sybil Moholy-Nagy, 5-year course. And in the middle of the 3rd year, she said, students, you have 3 minutes to design a city. Ready, go. Most of us couldn't find our pencils. So this is what I did. I drew an apple, and inside the apple, I put a crystal cube. And I turned it in, and she said, what are you thinking about? I said, that our communities need something like a crystal cube in the center, the core. And this is a place that can reflect the universe, the world, like in a medieval village where the cathedral was the center of the village, the highest point, where painters could gather, musicians gather. If you were rich or poor, you could walk in the door. It was the center of the village, the highest point. So that one class has helped me in everything that I do in the theater, opera, since then. So I decided to make this work 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. About the life and times of Joseph Stalin. And we would spiral into the center of the 4th act and spiral out. And 1 and 7 were related, 2 and 6 related, 3 and 5 related. This was a beach. This was a planet in outer space. This is a Victorian drawing room. This is a Victorian bedroom. This is a temple beneath a temple beneath the ground, a temple of light. And this was a cave beneath the earth. So you had a cave with the light to the outside, a temple of light beneath the earth with a dark doorway leading outward. This was 1907, the center of the fourth act, the death of Stalin's first wife. Stalin was studying to be a priest. In 1907, his first wife died. And it seemed to me, in my naive way of looking at his life, that at this moment, something begins to change. And this monster developed. Stalin had 2 identical apartments. And in that apartment, he had 2 armchairs that were in each apartment that were draped in fabric. And I made chairs of sculpture for Stalin. Next. So this was the death of the first wife, and I had 2 Stalins in 1907. Next. There's the Temple of Light with the doorway leading outward, in opposition to the cave with light leading outward. Next. This is a Victorian bedroom. Next. This is the planet in outer space. And we had a ballet of ostriches. 68. Next. Okay, this is when Christopher came to live with me, and we decided to do a letter for Queen Victoria. And I was thinking about a letter, an envelope. So I made a dress for a woman in the first act that was in a white cape and a black cape that traced the lines of this envelope. And this first act, the second act had a window and light coming in that followed the diagonal lines of the back of an envelope. And I said to Christopher, I said, Chris, what is the last line of the play? I don't know. I said, Christopher, what's the last line of the play? He said, I don't know. I said, come on. Christopher, what's the last line of the play? He said, let me think. Okay, I've got it. I said, what is it? It's the angle of the thing angling. I said, okay. So I had 2 houses in the fourth act. And at the end, I had the house on one side of the stage go on a 45-degree angle. Next. This is Christopher and myself performing, and this was a show curtain. And he wrote the text. I'm reading the bottom line. It's O, A, O, A, O, A, O, A, O, A, O, A, O, 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 hap, hath, very, whatever. There would be these spaces in between him rapidly speaking, and when you transcribed it, you saw these pyramids of construction. I don't know how he did it, but he must see patterns like hieroglyphs or something as he's speaking. Next. This is the woman in the white cape that traced the lines of the envelope. Next. This is my grandmother. She lived in Waco. And I was in Paris performing a letter for Queen Victoria. And I called her and I said, hi, grandmother. It's Bob. How are you doing? Well, I'm doing pretty good. I said, I'm in Paris and I'm making a play called A Letter for Queen Victoria. And I was thinking maybe you could play Queen Victoria. Oh, that'd be real nice. I said, no, this is Paris, France, not Texas. I'd love to go to Paris. So she flew to Paris, and I met her at the airport, and we were driving into the city, and I said, "How are you?" "Well, I'm pretty good." She said, "But do you know, Bob, I have to take 9 pills a day to stay alive. I have to take 1 heart pill, 1 sugar diabetic pill, 1 liver pill, and without all those pills, I would just collapse." She said, "Bob?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Am I going to have to say anything in your play?" I said, "No, grandmother, I think you can say what you just said." So we gave her a gray Victorian dress, and she walked out every night to the French audience. She said, "You know, I have to take 9 pills a day to stay alive. 1 heart pill, 1 sugar diabetic pill, 1 liver pill. And without all those pills, I would just collapse." She was a big hit in Paris. She said, "Bob, these lights hurt my eyes, and I'm going to have to wear my shades." I said, "Okay, that's great. Wear your shades." Next. This was Queen Victoria. The man sitting on the chair on the opposite side was Stefan Brecht, who's the son of Bertolt Brecht. The people who performed in it were housewives from New Jersey, people I've met on the street, a factory worker, or all non-professionals. Next. And these are the chairs I made for Queen Victoria, and they were the opposite of the chairs for Stalin, which were more organic, but these both sets of chairs were made in lead, and here the Queen Victoria chairs had car lights in them. Next. Next. Okay, so I have now met Phil Glass, and he came to see the life and times of Joseph Stalin, all 12 hours. And afterwards, we had breakfast, and we were talking. I said, "How do you write music?" And I didn't know him before, and so he explained to me how he wrote music, and I said, "Wow," I said, "that's very similar to the way I write a play." And it was theme and variation. And that morning, the very first time I met him, we talked about making a work together. And I made this drawing. 1, 2, 3, 4, A, B, C, A, B, C, A, B, C. So I said, this could be a structure for the opera. And he said, okay. And I said, how long do you think it should be? I don't know. I said, do you think an hour? 2 hours? 3 hours? 4? 5? Yeah. I said, okay, 5 hours. So I said, we'll have 5 interlude scenes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And each of these will be 4 minutes long, and this will be 5. It's in the center, 4, 4. So it goes 4, 4, 5, 4, 4. And Act 1, 24 minutes. 1A, 22, 1B, 2C, 23, 2A, 21, 3B, 23, 3C, 22. Put them together, make them shorter. 18, 16, 19. 5 hours and 48 minutes. So I have some idea of how long these acts will be. I don't know anything about content or anything. I gave this map, this mega structure, to Phil. And from that, I made drawings and he wrote music. So I said, okay, what can one knee, I call them knee plays, like you have a leg that's joined by two similar elements joined by something structurally different. And I was thinking, we have 3 themes that reoccur 3 times. So it's theme and variation. And if I see my hand here, I can say it's a portrait. If I see my hand here, I can say it's a still life. But if I go across the street, I can say it's a part of a landscape. So I said the knee plays would be portraits. A and B themes would be still lifes. But the C sections would be landscapes, would be the deepest space. And I began to make drawings. So I put a little room over to the corner of the stage near the audience for the knee play. Then I had a train. Einstein talked about trains crossing the stage. And it was interrupted by a vertical line of light. And the train disappeared, came back the second time, and went halfway across the stage, again interrupted by a vertical line of light. And train went away and came back a third time, went 2/3 way across the stage, interrupted by the vertical light. Einstein said, if you see a train going across the field, for your perspective, you see that. But if you see it from above, you see a line. Next. So that was the train. Then it was 1B, and it was a courtroom. And high up in the courtroom was a horizontal bar of light. And in the middle of the courtroom was a bed, and the edge of the bed was illuminated. So it was a horizontal light. To me, time is a line that goes to the center of the earth and to the heavens. And space is a horizontal line. And it's that cross of time and the space that is basic architecture to everything. It's how you play Mozart on a piano. Your finger goes down on a key and up and out on a string. And the tension that it can be created between an attack or caressing is the difference in sound. I did Parsifal here at the opera. The center bar of music is when Parsifal catches the lance of Klingsor. I had him hold it horizontally and turn it vertically. And he says, time becomes space. That is the center of Parsifal, of Wagner's Parsifal. Here he is the white knight. Here is the black knight. King Lear, Shakespeare's Lear. I shall go mad, says the king. It's the center line of the play. Here it's in a man-made environment. Here Lear is in nature. It's the same structure that I had for Stalin. Almost all my plays I can tell you less than 3 minutes what they are with a diagram or mathematically. Structure is not important in the long run. It's how you fill in the structure. But without structure, I don't know where to go or what to do. An architect builds a building. And this man lives in the building and wants his apartment like that. She wants her apartment like this, and I want mine like that. We all live in this apartment building with our own aesthetics, but there's a cohesion because of the megastructure. Classical architecture is buildings and trees. The tree helps you see the building helps you see the tree. It's like Greek drama, right? You have a chorus and a protagonist and antagonist. You have, in ballet, you have a corps de ballet and the prima ballerina in front. It's buildings and trees. So, going back to Einstein, the little room, again, is the next knee play, next. And then for the C sections, the deepest space, I had a field. And in the field, I had a spaceship. And the A section, 2A, when it comes back, is a train at night. So we had the train from the first 1A. Now it's a different time, different space. Next. And then we come back to the B section, the courtroom, half of it disappeared and became a prison. Then in the far corner, you went back to the field, and the spaceship was larger, as if it were approaching. Next. And then we go to the final act, and we have the B theme, which had been the horizontal bar of light, and we see it. Nothing on stage but a bar of light horizontally, and then it rose up slowly and flew away to the vertical. See, light was not something done a few weeks before we opened. It was structural, it was integral. It was written in the beginning. It was first. First day of school in studying architecture, a famous architect said, students start with light. Next. Next. So now this is Einstein, and Einstein said if he had to live his life over, he'd rather be a plumber. So I made the furniture out of plumbing pipe. So this is the first knee plate. Next. Citrain, then with the vertical line of light. Next. The courtroom with the horizontal bars of light, the window high up in the courtroom. Next. The train at night. Next. The courtroom where half of it disappeared and became a prison. Next. The fourth act, 4A, this building, which was in the same perspective as we last saw the train in the A section. Next. The horizontal bar of light. Next. That rose up. Next. And flew away. Next. Now we're in the interior of the spaceship that we saw approaching. And people were, for the most part, many people were confused. And said, why do you call it an opera? Well, in the Latin sense, the word opera means opus, means work. And my work is visual. See, the visual book was not a decoration. 5 times, Washington, D.C. refused to copyright what I did as an author for Einstein on the Beach because I turned in diagrams and drawings. So pictures don't constitute a book for an opera. They were the book. It's from that book that Phil wrote the music. Next. This is Krista and I performing next. Next. I did this here in Houston many years ago in the 70s. I wrote a play of nonsense called I was sitting on my patio, this guy appeared, I thought I was hallucinating. And I did the first act, and next, Lucinda Childs did the second act. And the text for the first act was the same as the second act. But no one could believe it was the same text because we did it in completely different ways. Next. Then I started working with professional actors, and I made a work in Berlin called Death, Destruction in Detroit. It was based on Rudolf Hess. And this was a photograph I'd found next of Hess in Spandau prison, raking next. That's when Hess parachuted down in 1941 in Scotland. Next. Now Hess was like Siegfried pulling a sword on a dragon on dinosaurs. Next. 2 people sunbathing themselves on a rooftop during a world war in New York City at night. Next. And these were the beach chairs in which they were sunning themselves. Next. Then I filmed the murder of Delphine Glantz. This is Cheryl when she looks into the blade of the knife before the quick movement. It was like a mirror. Next. And then I started working in Europe with professional acting companies. This is at the Kammerspiel in Munich. Next. Next. Production called The Golden Windows. Next. This is a letter that Raymond wrote me where he drew a dinosaur on top of a mountain. Father, mother, child, boy, girls, loves, boy, father, mother, love. YMCA, father, mother, peace, and love, and father, mother, child, and son, and son, and love, father, love, Raymond. See, at this time, he knew maybe 50 words. So with 50 words, he could express everything. And it's very curious, with knowing only 50 words, to see the structure of the mind. It's not the way we're taught grammar. Next. Then I made a work with Jessie Norman called Great Day in the Morning. And I gave her for her birthday a box of different settings. And this was the show curtain. And she said, what is that? I said, there's settings for you to sing. Anything you want. You can sing Mozart, Schubert, whatever you want. She said, I know what I want to sing. And I said, what is that? I want to sing the Negro spirituals. Next. So we staged it in those settings. And Jessie, being a rather large woman, I made everything much larger around her so she would appear to be very petite. Next. As she was sitting on a dock of a bay, and A gray goose took 3 minutes and 50 seconds to cross the stage. Next. This was the final scene, and she was sitting on the side of a bed, and she walked to a window and looked out the window. There was a lake, and there was a moon. And then she walked to a little table near the audience. Next. And that took 10 minutes. It was in silence. And then she took a pitcher of water and she poured it into a glass. And the glass filled with water and spilled to the top of the table. And she continued pouring as the water spilled to the floor. And then she began to hum Amazing Grace as the curtain came down. And the next morning, there was a German journalist, and she said, "Why did she continue to pour the water?" And I said, "Oh my God." She said, "No, I want to know, what was the reason? Why did she continue to pour the water?" And she asked impatiently again, and Christopher Knowles was with me, and he said, "There is no reason." And he was right. It was more like a Zen idea, full of meanings. And to have given one meaning would have negated all the other ideas. Some years ago, I was in London, and Jesse was on a talk show. They said, "Miss Norman, what is your favorite recording?" And she said, without hesitation, "Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream." Thank you. Thank you. We could have the house lights. And if any of you would like to ask a question or make any comment in the closing few minutes, it'd be nice to have a dialogue. Yes. So the question was, what happened to Raymond? Well, when he first came to live with me, I tried to get him to go to the Lexington School for the Deaf in Manhattan, and he didn't want to go. So I said, okay. Then I tried to get him to go to the Trenton School for the Deaf in New Jersey. And he had never been around other deaf people, or to put it correctly, let's say hard of hearing people. And he didn't want to go. So eventually, he said to me he would like to go to the Trenton School for the Deaf. And it was very complicated because he had never had formal education. So in some ways, he had to start like with the first grade, but he was 15, mature. Anyway, he finally finished his studies in Trenton. He's living in Summit, New Jersey. He has a girlfriend and a blue Buick, and he's doing just fine. Anything else? Yes.
Is the dress Jesse Norman is wearing, was it done by Christophe de Manel?
About Christophe?
Yes.
What about her?
Was Jesse Norman's dress?
No, that was done actually by Yves Saint Laurent, but Christoph did the clothes for the Golden Windows in Munich, and she designed a very beautiful dress like this. It was one black panel for a young girl, and it was from here open, and so that when she moved, the dress would move. There are only two lines in the world, right? There's a straight line and a curved line. That's all. So if you're an architect, what do you want? Frank Gehry, what do you want? So many times it seems that architects can't make up their mind. Or anyone, a costume designer, but she did these dresses. It was a young girl, and she had a white dress, and it opened, and you could see the leg as she walked. But there was an older woman, and Christoph made the dress tied to the knee and open. And the older woman, who was 85, she said, "Why can't you open my dress from the hip down?" She said, "These legs are still good." And the young girl was saying, "I can't be so exposed. I don't want my legs." But it's not easy to make a dress like this. This was one line that went completely around one. She's a great artist. Her mother, Dominique, said that it was Christoph's eye that was the most beautiful. Next, anything? Yes.
I know that I saw a play, opera that you did at the Contemporary Arts Museum here in Houston with Lucinda Child.
Yes, the patio play.
Do you remember the year, please?
The name of the play was, I was sitting on my patio, the sky appeared, I thought I was hallucinating. And we just did it in Paris, but we did it with two young actors. And they did it completely different than the way Lucinda and I did.
I seem to have a photograph of Lucinda on the floor and a man sweeping. I don't know where it came from, but I would like to send it.
She's amazing. We just did a work in Hamburg at the Thalia Theater, and Lucinda and I did with Jennifer Coe, the violinist. She played 2 hours and 20 minutes, all the solo violin music of Bach. And Lucinda performed, and she's, I think, 83 now or something. Extraordinary beauty that Andy Warhol made when she was 17 films of the most beautiful women in the world, the 7 most beautiful women in the world. And years later, I said, "Andy," I said, "who was the most beautiful?" He said, "Lucinda." Next. Yes. Thank you.
I can project, probably. First of all, gracias. Thank you. Hello? Yes, muy bien. We'll project. All right, thank you and gracias. I want to ask, I have 10,000 questions, so I'll try to stick to just 2. My first question is, what is your understanding of why or how your work and your perception of time and your way of expressing and creating all this work was better appreciated and understood in Europe than in the United States? And then my second question is, your multidisciplinary approach to using the chairs in your creative work. So yeah, one is the perception of time in Europe, and the other one is your engagement or expressing with chairs in different ways.
Well, the use of time. People say, oh, in Robert Wilson's work, everyone moves slow. So if I think to move slow and I move slow, it's one thing. If I don't think about it and I move slower than I normally do, everything is going on. The body is full of hundreds of different speeds and energies happening simultaneously. And it has no concept. It's something you experience. Susan Sontag said to experience something is a way of thinking. So for me, time is not something that is intellectual, but it's something you experience. And if you're structuring time and space, that's one thing. But as I said, I use a vertical and a horizontal, and the tension between time being vertical and space being horizontal, and it's the interruption of space by the vertical line, and it's decisions you're making, whether you're a composer or a playwright or whatever. It's a decision, a conscious decision made. But then forget about it. Structure is only a form, a means to get you to another place. You can see 100 girls dancing Giselle, the same steps that Petipa wrote in the 19th century. And why is there one that's the most beautiful? It's how she feels in the form. And ultimately, that's what's important. The steps are not so important. So the structure and the form is not so important, but it's how you fill it in. And the other part was? The use of the chairs. Chairs. Oh. I was 11 years old, and I went to Alamogordo, New Mexico, to visit my uncle. He lived as a recluse in the white sand desert, and he had built for himself an adobe house and painted it white. And he had one room with a mattress on the floor and a Navajo blanket covering it. He had another room with Native American pots. And another room, he had just one chair. It was a very simple chair. And I said to my uncle, oh, Uncle Sherrod, that's a very beautiful chair. And this was at Thanksgiving, and for Christmas, he gave me the chair as a present. So I wanted to live like my Uncle Sherrod. I took everything out of my bedroom. I wanted to sleep on the floor, and I had just this one chair. And I was 18, and his son, my cousin John, wrote me a letter, says, my father gave you this chair, and it's mine, and I want it back. So I sent it to him, and from that day to this day, I started collecting and looking at chairs. Anything else? Yes.
Do you think Raymond, when he creates his image...
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Do you think Raymond, when he creates his images, does he begin with structure or something else?
Well, with Raymond, I started listening in a different way, and I worked with movement with him. I mean, the deaf tend to be very hyper, And so this rocking movement was very calming that he did. And somehow we stumbled on that. And from that, sound came. Yeah. One last question. Yes.
I don't have a question. I hope you remember me. I'm Dean, and I was in your summer program in 2011.
Uh-huh.
And then I did it again in 2013, or I did it in the spring in 2013. Mr. Wilson, like that program meant so much to me. It was something that really changed the course of my artistic life. And I told you many times while I was there in Watermill, thank you, but I just wanted to tell you again in Houston.
Oh, nice to see you. Well, towards the end of the 80s, I was, I guess, going through a midlife crisis, as men often do at that age. And I said, I didn't want to work any longer in the theater. At that time, I could work almost any house in the world I wanted. And I wanted to go back to my roots, like the time when Raymond came to stay with me, or Christopher. And I could never do something like that at the Paris Opera. I couldn't do something like that at Schaubühne in Berlin. And I found this abandoned building on Long Island that had been a laboratory for Western Union who did experiments in telecommunications, and it had been abandoned in 1959. And 1989, I acquired it. It looked something like my loft at 147 Spring Street, and I wanted to go back to my roots. And by this time now, I'd had the fortune to work in Latin America and Far East, Middle East, throughout the world. And I wanted to bring people together from different cultures, different countries, artists, scientists, mathematicians, anthropologists. And one of the dilemmas we have in this country is that we tend to be very cut off and not really know so much about what's going on in the rest of the world. So I wanted to, as you know, at Watermill, we have the center building has no door. It's always open. And started with an open door policy. And so a little bit like that Cuban side of the apple, that the cathedral in a medieval village, any nationality, rich or poor, any faith or no faith, it's always open. And so I started the Watermill Center and inviting then people to come and realize their own work. And it's my legacy. It's what I would like to leave behind. We have no, I didn't want any school. You know, what I did was right for me. It wouldn't be right for you or someone else. You know, I learned what I learned not by reading a book, by living life. Walking down the street in Summit, New Jersey, and seeing a cop about to hit a kid over the head with a club. And my life was forever changed. By chance of meeting Christopher Knowles, so the Watermill Center is a center in Long Island. It's based on 4 principles, which actually I wrote when I was 27, the bylaws for the foundation. We must always look to the past as we go forward. We must always support our community of the land, the earth from which we were born or which we stand. Our nation, the city of Houston. And to make this city great, we must look at the global community. What is happening in Afghanistan? What is happening with Eskimos? What is happening in Bahia in the jungle and Brazil? And I think one of the great examples you have in this city is what Dominique de Menil did with the Menil, that she changed the face of Houston. She helped elect the first black senator. She brought Nelson Mandela here right after he was out of prison. One of the most beautiful things is that I saw her here at the Rothko Chapel with the Dalai Lama, and they had two Louis XV chairs facing the public, the Rothko Chapel. And the Dalai Lama walked out and sat in the chair, and she walked out, and she took her chair and picked it up and turned it to the Dalai Lama. There was no way she was going to sit facing out. She made a center here in Houston. She supported my first play, The Deaf Man Glance. 7 hours long and silent. They went to France. Wow. In closing, they say that the baby is born dreaming, with the eyes closed and moving rapidly, which is the sign of a dream state of mind. What's the baby dreaming? Thank you.